Hello and welcome to the Everything is Black and White podcast. I'm Andrew Musgrove, and there's no Monday show today. Well, not in the traditional sense anyway, because I'm off enjoying a well-earned break, if I do say so myself. So, in place of the usual Monday show with myself and Aaron Stokes, I've got John Gibson to come on, and we've done a pre-record where I've tasked John with naming the best Newcastle United starting 11 made up of members of the club's Hall of Fame. And there's quite a list to choose from. And as you might suspect, given it is the Hall of Fame of Newcastle United, they are absolutely brilliant players to pick from and build the best 11 possible. So this is Gibbo's Corner. Simply the best Newcastle United 11 made up of the club's Hall of Fame. It's not the sexiest titles, but I think you get what we're getting at. John, you excited for this one?
Yeah, I mean, there's some terrific names in there, and you realise the sort of talent we've had down the years when you go through that list. And there's still, and no doubt we'll be getting to it eventually, there's still some very, very good names to add to that list in the future that should be Hall of Famers. So it's been a lot of fun, and I'm certain it'll be a lot of fun for listeners and viewers because it's a matter of opinion. From all the great names, you could pick six sides, couldn't you? When you go through the Hall of Famers, you could pick six sides that would absolutely represent the club and ourselves terrifically well. And certainly, I've come up with 11, which I believe is the top of the crop.
What I'll do is I'll read through the names on the list and then we'll go through your team. But just to give people a choice to quickly jot it down while they're listening and they can pick their own side. So we're going to go in alphabetical order, and it's Shola Ameobi, Peter Beardsley, John Beresford, Frank Brennan, Frank Clark, Andy Cole, William Coulson, David Craig, Les Ferdinand, Hughie Gallacher, Shay Given, Steve Harper, Joe Harvey, Kevin Keegan, Jimmy Lawrence, Rob Lee, Malcolm McDonald, Bill McCracken, Terry McDermott, Jackie Milburn, Bobby Mitchell, Bobby Moncur, Sir Bobby Robson, John Jock Rutherford, Stan Seymour, Alan Shearer, Gary Speed, Pavel Srnicek, and Colin Veitch. And then we have Alberto Solano and Mick Martin added in the last year or so. So as we said, Newcastle United legends there in abundance, some real talented players from all generations. John, lucky enough to have become close pals with some of them, and lucky enough as well to have watched some of them play, especially those older ones, with all due respect,
Yeah.
John, that the younger listeners will not have seen in the flesh, but will have heard brilliant stories from their granddads and their fathers and what have you. But shall we start with the question, which I think is always an interesting one? What makes a Hall of Famer?
Is a very good question, and I think it falls perhaps off the top of my head into two categories. There's the obvious category, the long server, the guy that's been at the club for so long and gives such loyal service and has racked up a few hundred appearances. He has a place in the Hall of Fame because he's been such a great servant and was so respected within the club. On the other side of the thing, you can get somebody who's been such a startlingly wonderful player, whose career has been cut short by injury or because he'd come along and in the era where the club cashed in on him and transferred him because they had a lack of ambition, and they've got a right to a place in the Hall of Fame as well because they have been a class apart in the world of football, and especially if they happen to be Geordies too. So it splits, and as the fans will realise when you've just named the Hall of Fame, there's two or three that fit in on the long service, and there's two or three that fit in because they were just simply wonderful. And then there's somebody like Sir Bobby Robson, who got every right to be there, but never played for the club, of course. But he qualifies because he was a manager of the club and so great for the club during the managerial. But I think he's the only one that um, actually has only managed the club. We've had people like Kevin Keegan in that list who played and managed. Joe Harvey played and managed. Stan Seymour played and managed. But the only one that managed alone in the Newcastle United Hall of Fame was Bobby Robson.
Yeah, very, very true, and thoroughly deserved to be named in that list. And the brilliant thing about this is that there's always opinion about who should be in it, who's next, and there's always debate about whether some are more deserving than others. But that list really is made up of Newcastle United legends, isn't it? And we saw the emotion from both Mick Martin and Alberto Solano in the last year or so when they were inducted into the Hall of Fame. And it's interesting because it's people like Alberto Solano that I'm really intrigued by. They come to Newcastle United, obviously moved from Boca Juniors, wasn't it? First proving to play in the Premier League, might only still be the only proving to play in the Premier League. And this is now his home. Obviously, he's just taken over as Blythe manager, but this is now his home. And it's really intriguing when you see not just foreign players, but you've got Malcolm McDonald, for instance, lives up here as well, that they set up home here. And it's that connection to the club that it's very special, and you can see that it means just as much to them as it does to fans when they get an accolade like this. When they pick up the phone and they're told, Nobby, you're going to be in the club's Hall of Fame, and they get emotional. And there's something special about it, the fact it works both ways.
Yeah, I mean, Newcastle's always had that pull. Once they come up here, they don't want to leave. And yes, Nobby's the obvious one because he come from the other side of the world. It's made this his home. But in the past, when we weren't getting foreign players up to Newcastle because it wasn't the trend in those days, it's amazing how many came back here. I mean, off the top of my head, you think of Bob Moncur come from Scotland down here, went on to be a manager all over the place, but come back here to live. Malcolm MacDonald, as you mentioned, came back here to live. David Craig, a lad from Northern Ireland, from Belfast, one club man at Newcastle. He has lived here ever since he stopped playing for Newcastle. Jinky Smith, the guy who was spent all our money on, all our profits from winning the European Face Cup. Joe brought him down from Aberdeen, Glasgow, a big Celtic fan. He still lives in Newcastle. A lot of players who once have been to Newcastle, when they're finished altogether, come back and live here. And that's how much of a pull the area's got, the club's got, football's got, and above all, the people have got. They want to live with Geordies because they're passionate people who adore their football. And it's a wonderful countryside, A lot of people in the old days used to think it was all sort of pit heaps and whippets and handicap, and nothing could be further from the truth. Once they see what a beautiful area this is and going up the Northumberland coast, etc., they don't want to leave.
Yeah, I don't blame them. A wonderful part of the world to live in. Right, shall we start with your best Newcastle United starting 11 made up of Newcastle United's Hall of Famers? You're going to go for a 4-3-3 formation, is that right?
Yeah. Simply so I can get in people that I want in without shoehorning 15 centre forwards into a team of 11, which is what Gareth Southgate is trying to do with England. I haven't quite gone that far, but to get the right front three, I've gone 4-3-3.
It's interesting when we do these sort of videos where we do pick, the starting 11 and we do it as a special. I'm always intrigued, John. Have you picked a team of stars because you've wanted to get the best players in, or have you picked a team that you think if they played together would gel and would play good football and just work?
I hope it's a bit of both. I've picked players who I think are outstanding in their position. Because I think that is absolutely important. But I've also looked at them as a team and thought, yes, it could work. And if there's an eye opener, like, how's you picked him? Is it going to work? I'll try to explain why I think it would work. But there's also the criteria that I always had and always heard top players tell me, whether they were Jackie Milburn through Malcolm MacDonald, through Bobby Robson. If you've got good players, they can play together, they can adapt. Good footballers. I mean, Harvey used to say so, and Bobby Robson used to say so. I don't have to tell so and so how to play football. He knows how to play football. He's a genius. I've just got to get him on the pitch. And good players can play together. But I've tried to build it into a side and not just 11 individuals.
Interesting. Right, we'll start with your goalkeeper then. And you had quite a few to choose from, but who have you gone with?
I've gone with Shay Given, and I think he is a given, given his record that he is the best goalkeeper. I mean, 462 games for Newcastle. He was only 34 games away from being the club's all-time record appearance, which is held by Jimmy Lawrence, another goalkeeper. I didn't select him. Why didn't I select him? Because I never saw him, and I did see Shay Given. Jimmy Lawrence must be one of the few I never saw at my age, but I didn't. And Shay Given is so wonderful, and it's a great shame, when you have wonderful servants, you want them to get rewarded. And Alan Shearer got rewarded by becoming Newcastle's greatest ever goal scorer. And Shay Given ought to have got rewarded by being the record appearance in the club. He was only 34 games short, but I don't blame him. I know why he went. It was back in January of 2009. We lost 5-1 at home to Liverpool. I was at the game. And by the way, we only kept it to 5 because of Shay Given. But he was that fed up with the tactics we used, the way we played, the way we were outrun. It was the breaking point for him. And looking back, he said to me, Gibbo, I had the great years. I played through the entertainers. I played through the years after the entertainers. I had a wonderful time in a vibrant city, which he still calls his home, second home to Dublin to this day. And he's got family as well as friends up in this area. He said, but that was breaking point when I watched us being humiliated at home 5-1 and I was in goal and he went off to Manchester City. And so he never got that record, which I think was a great shame. But the nearest he got to a gong at Newcastle, remember Shearer didn't get a gong at Newcastle. The nearest he got to a gong at Newcastle was the FA Cup final 1998. Obviously, he got a runners-up gong. He played in that. Amazingly, the next year, 1999, he didn't play in the cup final. And it was quite amazing because there'd been a change of manager. We'd gone from Dalglish to Hullett. And Given played in every single round all the way to the final and then was left out at the final for Harper, who was only playing his 10th game, his 10th senior game for Newcastle. It was quite a startling decision to be made when you look back on it. You had a goalkeeper that played all the way through and obviously been successful because we'd got through, was dropped for the final for a bloke who was only going to play his 10th game. But there you are. Shay Given, 134 caps for the Republic of Ireland, including 52 clean sheets. That tells you he's a bit tasty. And he wasn't 6 foot, he isn't 6 foot, which isn't tall for a keeper. Keepers are often in the mid 6'6", 6'7", are built like Dan Burn. So therefore, he was much more of a liner than a goalkeeper that took crosses. He was a shot stopper. He was an immense shot stopper. He was more in the mould of Ronnie Simpson than Peter Schmeichel. Simpson was a acrobatic shot stopper in the 55 Cup final. Peter Schmeichel was the physical colossus that just barred the way to all the goals. But Shay, the lovely thing with Shay, he was always his own man. He left Newcastle with only 34 games to go to him getting the all-time record. But then he always made brave decisions. Early doors, before his career took off, he turned down Alex Ferguson and he walked out on Glasgow Celtic, which are two of the greatest clubs in the eyes of anybody from the Republic of Ireland. They've got the huge support, Celtic and Man United. He turned down Ferguson and he went to Celtic when Liam Brady was the manager and the goalkeeper was Packy Bonner, two Irish legends, and Bonner was his hero. But he got a bad deal, left, and went back home to work in his dad's pitch and putt course on his own garden centre. Can you believe that? He walked out on Celtic to go and manage a pitch and putt course. But that's the sort of thing Shay would do if things weren't right. And he was rescued by another Celtic legend, Kenny Dalglish, who took him to Blackburn. And then from there, He eventually come on to Newcastle via a loan period at Sunderland because Kenny Dalglish was manager again up here. But an absolute, I mean, a top man, but an absolute wonderful goalkeeper. Made all those appearances, and now is effectively an adopted Geordie. I mean, he's never lived down, as you well know, and I've said before, he's never lived down that incident at Coventry when he become the only Irishman that didn't know where Dublin was, because remember Dion Dublin was standing behind him. He dropped the ball at his feet to kick it up the park, and Dublin nipped round the back of him and stuck it in the net, and the goal was given. And he says, I've never been so embarrassed at all in all my life, but he saved us from embarrassment on many occasions. So he, from me, is the outstanding keeper and was an easy choice to start off with what becomes some difficult choices later.
Yeah, my first choice when I was growing up, he was the goalkeeper that I aspired to be, because I always wanted to be a goalkeeper when I was younger, and it was because of watching Shay Given, absolutely tremendous shot stopper, great servant for the club, and a lovely bloke as well. We'll go on to your next player then, and we'll go for your right back pick. Who have you gone for?
Yeah, I've gone for David Craig, simply because he was quality personified. Mr. Nice Guy, smooth operator, a ball-playing fullback before that become the vogue. Now everybody's got to be comfortable on the ball and everybody's got to attack from the fullback position. But David Craig was doing it in the 60s and 70s, whereas Frank Clark, his partner on the other side, was very much the ball winner. David was a ball player. And yes, he will be remembered because his career was blighted by injuries. I mean, he had injuries which cost him appearances in both Wembley finals for Newcastle of 1974 and 1976. But despite having regular injury problems, the guy still made 435 appearances for Newcastle over a 14-year period, the highlight of which, quite obviously, was the winning of the European Fairs Cup in '69. Although actually he helped Newcastle win their first ever FA Youth Cup back in '61. It was later won, you might remember, Andrew, by Gaza and that crew later on. But the first ever one, they won 1961. David Craig was in the side, so was Bob Moncur. He was in the side to become second division champions in 1965 and then won the European Fairs Cup in '69. The amazing thing is, you know, when we talk about players of David Craig's quality these days, you automatically think, well, the fella's becomes a millionaire. He doesn't have to work again. He's assured for life, etc., because he's been a top quality Premier League footballer and a regular international, made for life. In his days, not so, you know. I mean, when he retired having played for nobody else but Newcastle United. He retired in 1978 and he bought a milk round with Ron Guthrie, who was his old fullback at Newcastle, who played for Sunderland in their cup final in the 70s, winning cup final. He had 4 years as a milkman with Ron Guthrie. He then opened a news agents, which he had for 20 odd years, and he was selling the papers where he used to be the headline in those papers. He was now selling the papers. So he was a milkman followed by a news agent, and now for the last couple of decades, he's been a support worker for people with learning difficulties. And you know what? If you approach David today, he'll talk about those 3 jobs till the cows come home. But try to get him to talk about his football career, and he's almost embarrassed. You know, he's not, he's such a nice guy. He's such a quiet guy. He would never dream of saying I was a good footballer, never mind a great footballer. And he was a great footballer. But he's just a very modest man. But he's rightly got a place in our history. And for me, I haven't seen a better right back than David Craig was for us.
That was the question I was going to ask you, because you had Irvin Natris, you had Kieran Trippier, but for you, David Craig remains top of the tree.
Yeah, I think Nat suffered simply because he played in too many positions. He was so versatile. He played right back, left back, centre half, defensive midfield, and attacking midfield. He was too good for his own cause. If he'd settled in one position and established himself in that position, he would have become an England international. I mean, I've got so much time for that. It's untrue. And he was a personal friend, as David Craig was. But David Craig was a nailed on right back, and he did it beautifully. And he was a forerunner of what's come since. He was a modern right back who played in the 60s, in the 70s.
Yeah, absolutely brilliant. A couple of names there. And for David Craig to be top of the tree shows you just how good he is, and another good guy as well. We'll go into the centre back pairing then. I think this might throw up a few surprises to our regular listeners. But who are you going with first at centre back, John?
Well, first on the right hand side, I'm going with Frank Brennan, big Frank Brennan, known as the Rock of Gibraltar. He was as big and unmovable as Gray's Monument. I mean, he really, really was. He came down from Airdrie in Scotland in 1946. He was in the promotion side of 1948. He won the FA Cup in 51 and 52 with Newcastle. And he was frozen out of the 1955 Cup final side and left almost immediately afterwards and was forced out into non-league football. He went and joined North Shields. Now that's equivalent to Fabian Shaw going to Gateshead tomorrow morning. I mean, it is absolutely ludicrous. With total respect to North Shields, this guy was top of the tree. He'd just played in 2 successive FA Cup finals at Wembley. Newcastle had won them both, but he had dared to open a sports shop, which was exactly the same thing as the chairman, Stan Seymour, had in Newcastle. And that was a red rag to a bull to Stan. And Stan had so much power that he decided that was the end of Frank Brennan in the club, never mind in the team. And surely it was. And you can imagine the uproar, Andrew, in those days. A great big superstar was getting taken out of the side by the chairman for the obvious reason. I mean, the City Hall was packed to its rafters for a meeting of Newcastle fans objecting to Newcastle United's decision. The Trade Union Congress, annual Congress, it was brought up there and the words were bandied about slavery, football has been slavish, and etc., etc. The Chronicle ran about 5 pages every night of letters from readers complaining about what was happening to Frank Brennan. You know what happened? Stan Seymour got his way. It happened exactly the way it was going to happen. Now, the interesting thing for me is bearing in mind that we're doing this on the Hall of Fame, on Newcastle United's official Hall of Fame. And I remember this ever so well, and I'll tell you why. Big Frank was inducted into the Hall of Fame in 2014. Now, when he was inducted in, his and he's dead, of course, but his family are told you can bring along any personal friends you wish to the ceremony, which is going to be held in the inner sanctum at St. James's Park, etc. So what did the family do? They give me a bell and asked me to go as part of the Frank Brennan family to this induction. Now, if you remember, in 2014, it happened at a time when Pardew was just finishing as manager, but the big thing, Mike Ashley ran the club. Now, it happened at a time when I was barred from the press box. I'd written a few articles in the Chronicle that, shall we say, the ownership didn't quite agree with and decided I was no longer going to be a guest of the club on match days. Made no difference because my pals took me upstairs into one of the lounges, and so I saw the matches all the time. But can you imagine my feeling of pride and a little bit titillation on going along unannounced into the boardroom at St. James's Park as part of the official Frank Brennan induction into the Hall of Fame? I don't know how well that went down on the day, but it off went down well with me. And I was very, very grateful to thank Brennan's family for thinking of me, because he was a different class. The wonderful thing is, he took Noel Shields as manager to win the FA Amateur Cup at Wembley in 69, the same year as Newcastle won the European Fairs Cup. And I was so thrilled for him. I mean, we bandy about words like legend very easy. We also bandy around, Andrew, about tough guys. Football's tough guys. This fella was just ridiculous. Newcastle regularly played cricket matches in the summer around the local grounds, Newcastle United XI, because it filled the grounds and raised a lot of money for clubs. And they were playing this day at Benwell Cricket. And Frank was batting, and he batted the ball away towards the boundary, and he was running in between the wickets. The guy on the boundary threw the ball in, was totally wayward, and it was coming right down the middle between the two wickets. And Frank was running for his second run, and as he passed, he just nodded the cricket ball down with his head, like he would do with a football at any stage, and continued running and laughing. And no matter there was a cricket ball, people worry about heading a heavy football these days. He was heading cricket balls. But he also, and Jackie Milburn told me this tale, they went on a tour of South Africa, a 6-week tour, a 10-week tour, forgive me, a 10-week tour of South Africa. Frank turned up at the airport with a toothbrush in the pocket of his Newcastle United blazer, the top pocket, and naught else. He took no luggage whatsoever. He was, when they first arrived, they were presented. The whole team was presented with a Zulu spear each as a souvenir, and for the rest of the trip, he went from city to city with a toothbrush in his top pocket and a Zulu spear in his hand. And what he did, and I said to Jackie, well, how did he get by? Jackie said, well, he come to me for all his shaving gear and took Jackie's shaving gear. He got his vests from George Robledo, and he got his socks from Bobby Mitchell. And that's the way he travelled on tour. But he was a fabulous, fabulous player. And he used to say, when he was defending, these days you can get centre halves who are afraid of centre forwards, and they'll ask for somebody to tuck in behind them so there's no space left, and we can eliminate Haaland running on or whatever. Big Frank used to turn around to the other defenders and say, bug off and let me get on with the job. Get out my way, I'll sort these out. And Jackie said he was an actor who deserved an Oscar. He would flatten the centre forward absolutely into the ground, and then just as the referee appeared running across, Frank would pick up the centre forward, ruffle his hair and look terribly concerned that he wasn't injured, etc. If VAR had been round, Frank would have spent more time sitting next to me than he would have done on the pitch. But he was absolutely an outstanding player, and Newcastle's defence was built purely around him and Joe Harvey, who was the other centre half who played on his shoulder.
Yeah, a fantastic player, fantastic character by all accounts. The key question now, John, is who is partnering him in defence?
Well, I've got to go for Bob Moncur. Can you tell me how I can't get a player into the Newcastle United side who scored a hat-trick in the only European final Newcastle have ever played in the 130-year history? I know there wasn't European matches early in their history, but the biggest trophy, shall we say, Newcastle have won in the 130-year history, and Bob scored a hat-trick, and you can't get him in. And you could immediately say, well, is that two stoppers then? If you put Brennan in with Moncur, could they play in an actual team? Well, when Newcastle had their greatest defence, the two people that played at the centre of it were Harvey and Brennan. And Jackie Milburn always said to me, and he become a press man sitting in the press box with me when we won the first cup in '69. And he always said Bob Moncur was an absolute ringer for Joe Harvey, both in looks, the black hair, the rugged build, they played in the same position, etc. He said, and he was a ringer for Harvey, and Harvey and Brennan were some partnership. So if he's a ringer for Harvey, I think he can play with Brennan, seeing as Brennan played with Harvey all his career. And I mean, Bob was our Bobby Moore. He was Scotland's Bobby Moore. They played at the same time. Both were one paced. If you could be critical of them, but their brain was razor sharp. They read the game. The fact that you never saw they were one paced was due to the fact that their brain told them what the centre forward was going to do before he did it. So they were already moving into the right position to block the guy, and so they were never exposed on pace whatsoever. I mean, he was a great personal friend. I'm not going to go on too long about it. I mean, I ghosted his autobiography, United We Stand, which was held back incidentally in publishing because I got it virtually finished writing it when I published the Newcastle United FC story in 1969, which culminated with us winning the first cup. And there was such a public reaction to that. They were queuing twice round Waterstones because we had, can you imagine, I had the full team in Waterstones with me and with the cup on the end of the table, and people filed back to get their photographs taken and to get their book autographed by the whole team. And I've still got that picture to this day. It's a very treasured picture with the cup there. Can you imagine that happening these days? So they had to put back Bob's book while I wrote a second Newcastle United story, etc., etc. But one of the great moments, I mean, we took everything for granted winning that first cup because it was so new to us. I mean, we won it in June in Budapest, and a fortnight later, I was living in Whitley Bay. He popped down to see me. We went out into the garden, sat on a couple of deck chairs with a bottle of white wine, and he had the first cup on the back seat of his car, and he just stuck it on the lawn while we were having our white wine, etc. And I looked round, and Sally, my eldest daughter, my only daughter at the time, is putting mud in the first cup. She's picking handfuls of mud out of the garden and putting it in the first cup. And was just, no, dear, we'll take it in Gibbo's kitchen and wash it before you go off, Bob. And that was it. And that was the relationship. But Bob Moncur has earned his place in the Hall of Fame. He is still the last skipper to win a big trophy for us. So he's got to play the left-sided centre half.
And do you think Bobby Moncur would get into today's Newcastle United side?
He would walk in. He would
As simple as
walk
that.
in. Oh, there's no question. You can't buy his brain. You can't buy his brain. And by the way, until we find a centre half that scores a hat trick in a European final, I think it's nobody in the current side can challenge that and say, wait a minute, I'm better than him. I said, well, did he captain the side? Did he score a hat trick in the European final? Etc. etc. He also captained Scotland, by the way, as well, and against England. And I once saw him play. This is interesting. As an aside, I once saw him play centre half for Scotland, and Macdonald play centre forward for Newcastle, for England, when they were both at Newcastle. Interesting that was. And you know what? It was a good tussle. And Supermac was so fast. If he got away, Bob wouldn't have caught him coming back. But Bob could read situations as well. Quality player. And yes, he would live. You know, when they say that players couldn't play today because the game's quicker and because with the training that you get today, all great players could play. Do you think Stan Matthews and Tom Finney wouldn't be able to play today? Do you think George Best would have to be subbed in the second half because he'd be out of wind if he was playing today? Quality players can play in any age. Having said that, there's players around today in the Newcastle side that could have played in the 55 Cup final side, because that wasn't the best of the three sides in the 50s. The 51 was. And so there's players at Newcastle today. Isaac could go and play in those old Newcastle sides. And never split a hair. You know, great players can fit into any era.
Yeah, certainly. So we'll go from Bob Moncur to another fantastic player, great servant of Newcastle United. And one thing that certainly runs through this side is you can see the longevity of these players. You can look at the stats. You can see how many appearances they made for Newcastle United. And I mean, I haven't looked at it since you've given me the list, John, but I'm willing to make a fair bet that the 11 names you've given me will probably all be within the top 15, 20 appearance holders when it comes to record appearances. One man who he's not top of the list, but I think he's second or third, if I'm not mistaken, is your left back.
Yeah, Frank Clark. The interesting thing, and I didn't realise this when I was picking them individually, Andrew, but three of my back four were the 1969 European Fairs Cup winning players. There's only Frank Brennan that wasn't in that, and all four of the back four won trophies with Newcastle United, and that's a pretty rare statement to be able to make these days, isn't it? How do you leave Frank Clark out? 457 appearances for Newcastle. 457 outfield players. There's virtually nobody that's made more an outfield player. And say, well, what is his qualities? Well, I would just say to you then, you won a European trophy with Newcastle, the first cup. You won the ultimate European trophy with Nottingham Forest, the Champions League trophy. You won the First Division Championship with Nottingham Forest. He won the League Cup with Nottingham Forest. He just about cleaned up everything. And by the way, he was supposed to be finished when he left us. According to the board at Newcastle United, not the manager, but the board, according to the board at Newcastle United, we're going to free Frank because he's finished. He then went to Cloughie and won in about a few seasons more trophies than Newcastle United have seen in their lifetime since the 50s. So it's quite amazing. And you know what? I've put him in my side, and I will admit, sitting here now, Frank, he wouldn't get a game today. You know why? Because he's not an overlapping fullback. He was a defensive fullback. And these days, you can't have that. I mean, that's what was put against Dan Burn, that he couldn't attack. And by me, by the way, I'm not excusing myself from saying this, with big Dan Burn. And it's been said by Kieran Trippier with England when he plays on the left-hand side, not as comfortable as on the right, can't attack and support as much. Frank Clark never got over the halfway line at Newcastle. In those 457 appearances for Newcastle, he scored one goal, and that was in the League Cup. And we were playing third division side, and we were 5 up at the time he scored, and the roof came off the St James's Park because off the stand, because it was so amazing that he had actually scored a goal. But you know what? Supermax being around an awful lot, playing for Newcastle, playing for Arsenal, and playing for England, and they're three top sides of his era. And he has always said the best out-and-out defender he ever played with was Frank Clark. He could actually defend. And that's why Frank Clark would tear out the little bit hair he's got left today when he sees some of the defending by fullbacks. But he never went over the halfway line much, because in those days, you were a defender first, and then you were good on the ball. And we had Craig on the other side who went forward, and Frank stayed as the anchor.
Well, it's interesting you mentioned that because I'm just looking at your team here, and obviously I know the team ahead of our viewers and listeners. And I'm not going to give anything away on the next three
names.
picks. You are picking three across the midfield. Before I get to my points, the three you've picked across the midfield, how are you seeing them? Are you playing two and then the other one kind of roaming? Or are you playing three across the middle?
Well, I'm playing them really a little bit like, and I don't want to give away the names yet, but a little bit like Harvey did with his halfback line in 1965 when we won the second division championship. They were called halfbacks then, and his halfback was Anderson, McGrath, and Eiley. And people said Anderson and Eiley couldn't play together because they both attacked, couldn't defend for peanuts, and therefore they would never play in harness. Harvey got them where when one attacked, the other dropped in and sat. And when the other went, so they were both given license to go forward. But the minute one went forward, the other dropped in and sat. And I'm looking for that. And when we get to name the three, I'll tell you exactly how I think they would be able to dovetail each other. But in a way, it's like Harvey did there.
Mm,
But what I've got at the back is I've got Craig who can attack, but otherwise I've got defenders
yeah.
because
Well, I'll tell you
Brennan,
what, I was
Moncur,
going to make a point about that, about David Craig being an attacker, Frank not being so much on the other side. But I'll save it until you've named the rest of your team, actually, because then I'll not
yeah,
risk giving
the
anything
time to
away.
do it is at the end of
Yeah.
the team because
So
you can then say,
yeah,
how on earth can you put two attacking midfielders in there or something when you haven't got
yeah.
to,
So
and
I'll
then we
make a
can
note of that,
discuss it again.
and I'll do it at the end. We'll start with your first pick of the midfield. Who are you going with first?
Well, bear in mind that I've got to go with the Hall of Famers as opposed to my side. And I'm not talking about the man I'm going to meet now, but there's some people I couldn't consider because they're not in the Hall of Fame as yet that I would consider if I was just picking my
Well,
11.
well, we're saying that, John. You are allowed to have one free pass if you would like to. If you'd like to sub
No, I'm
someone
going to
out,
stick with what I've got because I think it's only fair to them and they are in the Hall of Fame. But I'll give you an example in giving you my midfielders in the front three. For example, I haven't been allowed, naturally, to include Gascoigne, Chris Waddle, or Terry Hibbert because they're not in the Hall of Fame. So there are people that, some fans might say, how can you pick a side and not put Gaza in it? For example, simple reason is because I'm picking my Dream 11 from the Hall of Fame, not from my personal Dream 11. Having said that, I want to emphasize that every single person I've got in this 11, I think are just wonderful, wonderful, absolute class. And I'm not suggesting for 1 second that any of this middle three would be left out because there is a Gascoigne. I'm just saying that these didn't even come into the equation because the three I've got are top of the pops. And it starts with Rob Lee. Is the first one I've picked on the right hand side. 381 appearances all in from 1992 to 2002, 56 goals scored. He played in the FA Cup final of 98. He played in the side that was twice Premier League runners up, which is the best results we've had since 1927. Premier League runners up, and he was in both those sides. He was literally one of the entertainers. Um, he was a guy that could initially. I spoke to Kevin Keegan about him at some length just after I come. I did a book called United Headlines, which was written from inside the club, talking and having free access to people like Keegan and Terry McDermott and Freddie Fletcher, who was the chief executive, as well as board members like Douglas Hall, John Hall, and Freddie Shepherd about the stories behind the headlines with Newcastle. And I was speaking to Keegan about him, and he said, I originally saw Rob Lee as a right winger in the mould of Steve Stone, who was playing that position with Nottingham Forest and England. And Steve Stone's a guy from Gateshead, incidentally. He says, I saw him as that. And if you remember, he played him as a right winger when he first come up here. But he said, the more I looked at Rob, the more I wanted him to influence a game. And it was difficult out there on the right wing. So I pulled him into midfield. He says, and for me, at that stage, when I was managing Rob Lee in midfield, he was the best midfield player in the Premier League. And he says, of all the people I signed, he was my biggest bargain at 700,000 quid. And when you think of what Keegan bought, I mean, when you look at Shearer and Les Ferdinand and Ginola and Philip Albert and Peter Beardsley and, I mean, he bought quality and then he bought more quality and then he topped it off with quality. And, to pick Rob Lee out like that is something very, very special. And Rob was special and much more special than some people realized because his greatest mate in Newcastle United was Alan Shearer. And if you knock about with Alan Shearer, you're sort of more or less under his wing and under his shadow because Alan Shearer is quite simply Alan Shearer. But I mean, the influence that Keegan talked about Rob Lee having at Newcastle, was never better emphasised than when we went to Antwerp in the UEFA Cup. It was the first time we'd been in Europe for 20 years, and we absolutely wiped the floor with Antwerp. Rob Lee scored a hat-trick, and they were all headers. Now, the hat-trick was a little bit surprising, but all headers, Rob. I mean, that was totally surprising. We were 1 up in 50 seconds, we were 2 up in 8 minutes, and we were 3 up by half-time. Terry McDermott, who was the number 2, as you know, to KK, who had won 3 European Cups with Liverpool, remember, told me after that game that was as good a one-off performance in Europe as I have ever seen. And he had that European record with Liverpool. And that was inspired by Rob Lee. And funny enough, he's dined out on that ever since. I'm doing a very, very big talk-in with him at the beginning of August in Newcastle. He's coming up. It was originally booked for the City Hall in Newcastle. And the whole night is under the banner One Night in Antwerp. The hook being his great hat-trick for Newcastle United, which was in Antwerp. And by the way, we destroyed them 5-2 in the return. This was the epitome of the entertainers, that particular side. And while Rob had some great years, he also suffered under Hullet, because Hullet took a dislike to Alan Shearer, because Alan Shearer was the Mr. Wonderful Hullet used to be as a player at AC Milan. He was going to bring him down a peg. And if he was going to bring Shearer down a peg, and one way of doing it was to bring Lee down 2 pegs, because that was his best mate. So Lee, as you well know, didn't get his shirt number, his squad number at all. And Shearer was dropped for Derby with Sunderland, etc., etc. But of course, when that was all over, Robson then made Lee his skipper and put him back in the side, and it was lift off for Rob after that. And pile of England caps, quality player in my side, justified.
100%. I think he'll be in most people's starting 11 when you look at the options you've got, but just the memories he created. Everyone remembers that pass to Alan Shearer for Shearer's volley against Aston Villa, which is another story he always dines out on. I did a job with Rob not too long ago last season, and that was one of the questions I asked him about that pass, and he says him and Alan always talk about it when it pops up on social media. Was it a pass that made it, or was it the volley that made the goal? It's special. And yeah, a tremendous leader, scorer of goals, great pass, great work ethic. And again, someone, John, that you would gladly fit into Newcastle starting 11 today alongside Bruno Angelino, in my opinion. An absolute tremendous servant for Newcastle United, and thoroughly deserved in this starting 11. Who's he alongside?
Centre of midfield, I'm playing Peter Beardsley. The only surprise there would be that he could well play as support striker alongside a striker, but he could play as a 10 behind my striker. I wanted to get the 3 strikers I've got, which we'll be naming in a moment. I wanted to get them into my side. And Peter Beardsley, by the way, is such a good player. He can play anywhere. He's such a good goalkeeper. He's such a good player. He could play in goal. And in fact, he did play in goal in one match. When we went down to West Ham, we had 3 goalkeepers in that match. We lost 8, by the way. We lost 8-0 or 8-1 or whatever it was. But we had 3 goalkeepers played in goal in one match. And Peter Beardsley, all 3'6" of them, bless him, was the 3rd goalkeeper. But I mean, simple question. Peter Beardsley's got to be in the side. His talent is so big he could play anywhere. Is there anyone better? I mean, Peter the Great, he is. For me, he's the most talented, naturally gifted footballer Newcastle have ever had. All-round footballer. Not striker, defender, or a particular art, but all-round ability. And he simply has to be in my side. And to get him into the side and allow others to also be in the side, he could play midfield. He made goals and scored goals. So it's as simple as that. They say, there's a saying in football, which is very true in lots of cases, never go back. You know, if you've been to the club and you've done terrific and you leave, don't go back, because all you'll do is spoil your reputation. And by the way, that's the reason Alan Kennedy didn't come back to Newcastle, because he'd done so well at Newcastle, made his name, made his reputation, went to Liverpool. When he was finished there and he could come back, he was wanting to come back to Newcastle. Newcastle wanted him, but he got cold feet. Never go back. So he went and signed for Sunderland. What a mistake that was. And he readily admits to that. But to say never go back, Peter come back and was just as good the second time. He played alongside Keegan the first time. Keegan, the manager, brought him back, and he was just sensational again. You can't believe this was a guy who started out as a factory worker on 25 quid a week and couldn't find a football club. He went to Gillingham and he went to Cambridge on trial, and they both turned him down. And this is a guy that ended up playing for Liverpool, winning the championship a couple of times. And Bobby Robson called him his little gem in the England side. That's how good this guy turned out. And he only got a league club because Bob Moncur took him to Carlisle. And he lived in Bob's house for about 6 months and ended up marrying Bob's secretary, who's his lovely lady to this very day. And he was a fabulous little player. I've had a lot to do with him down the years. When he won North East Player of the Year at Newcastle the first time, I flew with him to Paris to celebrate with Hennessy Cognac for a few days. I went over to Hong Kong with Wallsend Boys Club with Peter. I went over on a later date with Alan Shearer. I went over with Peter on that trip. And I was the sole judge when he won the North East Most Promising Newcomer Award while he was playing at Carlisle. I was the sole judge of that, and there was Rob Marsh of Sunderland. There was a jockey. There was a girl ice skater, and there was Peter. And I voted for Peter. Peter got it. Ironically, it was presented to him, Andrew, I just remembered this the other day, by Jack Charlton, who then became his manager at Newcastle once Arthur Cox left. And they didn't get on greatly. But that's another tale. But I always remember I did the traditional interview. You'll know this as much as I do. It's what we hacks do. He wins an award. You go up and he's got the North East Most Promising Newcomer, born in Newcastle. Would you like someday in the future to play for Newcastle United? Oh, that would be a dream come true, John. It's my hometown club. Hey, it's hardly rocket science. It's hardly sensational, but it's a nice little feature. So I print that, never think about it. The doorbell rings on a Sunday morning, and I look out the peephole in the door, and all I can see is a trilby. Can't see anything else. So I think, what's this? I've still got the gym jams on and the dressing gown. Open the door, and underneath the trilby is a familiar face, Bob Stoker, manager of Carlisle. And he's found out where I live in Newcastle. I lived in Wickham at the time. And he's come over to see me to complain that I'm tapping his best player to sign for Newcastle United. And how dare I? I mean, once I got him in and give him breakfast and that, he simmered down. But I mean, the ridiculous point is, by the way, that Bob never became Peter's favourite manager at Carlisle. And was the bloke that flogged him to Vancouver. I was supposed to be nicking him for Newcastle, and he wanted to keep him at Carlisle, but he flogged him to Vancouver. The amazing thing is, how you come from nowhere to be somewhere. And when he was told at Carlisle, we've done a deal for you with a transfer, I mean, Peter's thinking, oh, good, that's me into the big time. Which club is it that I'm going to join? And he said, what's the club? And they said, Vancouver Whitecaps. And Peter said, where's Vancouver? And he honestly didn't know that and he never thought it would be in Canada, a club in Canada. He said, where's Vancouver? At that stage of his life, he'd only flown once in his life, and that was to Holland with Wallsend Boys Club. And then he's going 6,000 miles to Vancouver. It was the making of him, because he was a sensation out there. We found out about him out there, signed him to play alongside KK, and that was us promoted, and that was the start of his wonderful career. Thoroughly deserved. Top, top, top player. And don't even ask us if he could play in the side today.
Oh, he would be worth a scary amount of money if he was playing
Absolutely.
today. By far the best player I've ever seen in black and white. The ball would just stick to his feet.
Oh,
Absolute tremendous player. And no surprise he's in that side there. Who is the third man in your midfield?
third man for a lot of reasons, and not for a sentimental reason, because that would seem obvious, but when I tell you who it is, but it's not for a sentimental reason, it's for simply for ability, and that's Gary Speed. Uh, I mean, even today, even now, when I'm talking about him, it brings a lump to the throat, because this guy had everything. He was ridiculously handsome. He looked like a film star. He was wonderfully, wonderfully gifted. He was articulate. He was a thoroughly nice man, and he could play the game. He was a mixture of a hard man and a velvet touch. He had both of them as a football. He was loved by everyone. He really, really was. Everybody's life he touched loved him. Geordies loved him. Welshmen loved him for obvious reasons. He was the Welsh manager at the time of his death. Yorkies loved him because he played for Leeds and Sheffield United. The Toffee men on Merseyside loved him. He was an Evertonian. And Bolton's Wanderers loved him. He was loved everywhere. And he was such a quality player. He joined us for £5.5 million from Everton. And he'd already won the championship with Leeds United as a very, very young player. He played over 200 times for us, 1998 to 2004, scored 40 goals. What a finisher he was. Played in the FA Cup finals 98-99 and played Champions League football for us with Sir Bobby. I mean, he had everything. He had steel, he had vision, he had a wonderful left foot. I've never seen a better header of the ball than Gary Speed, who must be up there with Sir Les Ferdinand as the supreme headers of the ball. And Shearer was no slouch in the air, but he really was top quality player. I mean, for years he held the Premier League record for the most appearances, 535. He won 85 caps for Wales. He was just an all-round good guy, an all-round top player, and looked as if he was going to be an all-round top manager, because he was pulling Wales from nowhere to somewhere at the time of his death. I mean, he died in 2011. He was only 42 years of age. I remember to this day, when somebody dies that is big in your life because of their fame, and you remember where you were that day, etc., etc. I'm thinking of John Lennon. I'm thinking of Elvis. In my lifetime as an Elvis fan, I'm thinking of President Kennedy. The stick in your memory. And Gary, when I heard of Gary Speed's death, it stuck in my memory. I was absolutely shocked, shattered, and just couldn't believe it. I mean, the day before, I'd been sitting in front of the television screen watching the Saturday lunchtime telly before matches, and Gary Speed was on with Alan Shearer, who was a very close mate of Gary's, very, very close mate of Gary. And they were both on, and he was a little bit more somber, was Gary, than he normally is, but there was no indications of anything untoward. And it was that night when everything went wrong and the light went out in loads of people's lives. And I haven't picked Gary Speed because of what happened to Gary Speed. I picked Gary Speed because my memory is not coloured by that. It is coloured by the joy that he brought to us, the joy that he brought to every club he played for. You talk to Leeds, you talk to Everton, You talk to Sheffield United, you talk to any Welshman, and they'll all be saying about Gary Speed what we are saying. And he was a terrific, all-round player. Wasn't bursting with pace, but you don't need to be if you've got the pace in your head. But he was bursting with strength, and he was bursting with subtlety, and the service he gave us was second to none, and he deserves, in my humble opinion, to be in the Hall of Fame's best team.
Yeah, 100% agree with you again. He had such an engine on him. It was just never ending. As you said, one of the finest headers of the ball. I remember the goal he scored against Bradford. It was a tremendous header from distance as well. Great in the tackle, great pass of the ball, and couldn't half hit it either. I mean, he had absolutely everything. And another player who kind of I don't want to say got better with age, but he never lost that level. And he might have lost a bit of pace, but what he could do, how he could affect the game right until the end of his career. Few others maintained the level he did. An absolute tremendous footballer, brilliant for Newcastle and all the other clubs that you've mentioned there, and still very, very, very dearly missed, never forgotten. And yeah, no surprise he's in that team. We'll go to your front three now, John. You've got 3 number 9s picked here, so I'm going to be very intrigued to see how this formation goes. Who are you starting with?
Yeah, and by the way, that is why I've got Peter Beardsley playing in my midfield, and I only put him in my midfield because, as I say, he can play absolutely anywhere he wants, including goal. But it's simply because I wanted to get these 3 guys as my spread up front. And by the way, if these 3 could have played together, they would have absolutely terrorized any defense. In fact, the defenders that they were playing against, if they were in the same side, wouldn't sleep for 3 nights before game, not the night before game, because of the firepower carried by these 3 guys. My first one is Jackie Milburn. And the reason why I can pick him without him being in the legendary position of centre forward, which is remembered by every single Newcastle United fan, is that what a lot of the younger listeners and viewers might not realise is before you become that legendary number 9, he was a great outside right for Newcastle with blistering pace, the ability to shoot, could cross on the run magnificently. And in fact, he was so comfortable playing outside right that when Newcastle lost their centre forward, and I think it was Charlie Wayman at the time, when they lost their centre forward, and he was having a discussion with Stan Seymour, Norman Smith, the trainer, and another guy. It was put up that perhaps Jackie could fill that number 9 shirt, and Jackie was horrified. He didn't want it. He didn't want to move. He said, "No, I'm great. I'm doing fine at outside right. I'll stay there. I don't know that I'm a through the middle striker. I'm quite happy where I am. I'm doing well. I'm in the team. I'll play there." So I've put him back in his original position because it lets me get a spread in the front 3. I mean, quite simply, I've been lucky enough to become friends with a lot of these players, so I've not called it my friendly 11, by the way. I haven't picked everybody because they're a friend of mine. I just happen to graduate towards wonderful footballers. And I'm lucky enough that they accept a poor old sod like me as a friend. But I graduate towards quality, and these guys are quality. They always say, there's a saying in life, isn't there? Never meet your hero. When you're a kid, never meet your hero, because the way you look at him through rose-tinted glasses, the guy's never done anything wrong. He's never spilled a drink. He's never failed to kiss a baby. He's never passed a dog without patting it on its head. Your hero is a superhero. You meet them, they become human beings with all the warts and everything that we've all got. So never meet your hero. My hero is a little lad in the 50s watching Newcastle United win the FA Cup 3 times in 5 years. I mean, little lads, you never get beyond the blinding obvious, do you? And when you're a little Ben and there's a centre forward scoring goals and running like the wind, he's your hero. you can't see a left back, can you? Or you're a little lad. You see the fella that goes flying through, scores the goals, runs away. The crowd go berserk. He's called War Jackie. He's a hero. I then worked with him as a journalist in the press box at St James's Park for years, and we've become great friends. And I ghosted quite a lot of his books. I also wrote the Jackie Milburn story under my own name as well. And it's been one of the privileges of my life to actually become close to the three people that are playing up front in this. An absolute privilege of my life to be able to do that. And it was after one of the books I wrote with Jackie called the Jackie Milburn's United Scrapbook, which I ghosted. It was after that was published, and I got a phone call from a fella called Brian Klein, who gave me a ring. I didn't know who on earth he was. And I said, yeah. He said, you did the book? Yes. He said, look, I'm a researcher on This Is Your Life, which was Eamon Andrews at the time, the famous This Is Your Life. He said, this book you've done with Jackie's brought him right back into the public eye. He never had a This Is Your Life when he was a player. Would like to do This Is Your Life. Will you work on setting it up? And one of the things, as you might well know, Andrew, with This Is Your Life, is that if the subject finds out about it before the day it's binned, it won't be done. They will not do it because it's the element of surprise with the guy. Out comes Eamon Andrews or whoever with a book. Jackie, this is your life. And he looks flabbergasted. But so if he's found out, they won't do it. So I had to phone up Laura, that's Jackie's wife, to say, look, I need your permission, etc. Jackie mustn't know, etc. There was 3 months' work between that first phone call from Brian Klein and the program This Is Your Life to be done behind the scenes. Laura said, yeah, I don't mind if you do it, but I'll tell you one thing. I'll never get Jackie to go to London, because that's where it was recorded, in London. Said Jackie will never go to London. He doesn't like the capital. It's too busy. He's not bothered. He's a Geordie lad. He'll never go down to London. So I went back to him and said, look's non-starter. Jackie won't come down to London, even on the excuse of going shopping with Laura, etc. They said, don't worry, we'll come up to Newcastle. It's the first time This Is Your Life had ever been broadcast outside of London. And they came up and did it in Newcastle. I've still got the tickets that got the crowd in, because there's a live audience. The ticket says, Jackie Milburn and John Gibson, a chance to score. That's what they called the programme. And it was supposed to be me and him talking and reminiscing about the book that had just been written. I had to look after Jackie for the full day of the programme, which was being done at the night time, to keep him out the way, because they were having rehearsals in the studio on just down on the quayside. So I had to keep him with me all day, and I arranged bogus interviews with Arthur Cox, the Newcastle manager, to talk about Newcastle United, etc. I got myself conned into getting lunch from Jackie up at Jackie's home, because I then let him go home and see that the family weren't there. So we went up there. He did me a fried egg and burnt the toast and whatever. And out came Eamon Andrews with a book at night. And among the guests, Bobby and Jack Charlton, of course, family. Billy Wright, England skipper. Tom Finney, Rach Carter. Bert Troutman had flown over from Pakistan, the goalkeeper that Jackie beat in 40 seconds in the 55 Cup final. His Aunt Bella had flown over from New York, never been over here from Yonks. And one of the great things I've got of that time is a Christmas card from 1981 after the programme, and written on its words cannot express our thanks for getting Jack to the studio, 10 out of 10, and an Oscar. And that was from Laura and Jackie Milburn. And funny enough, Mark Hannon, that works at Newcastle in the PR department, knocked on my door about a couple of years back. I opened it. He said, here's a gift for you, Gibbo. Thrust something in my hand and disappeared. And it was a video that he'd managed to find in an old shop, a charity shop or something somewhere. It was a video of Jackie Milburn's This Is Your Life, in which I put on a fleeting appearance. And I've treasured that ever since. But, you look at Jackie from such a different era to to anything we think of today. I mean, he played in 3 FA Cup finals and smoked cigarettes at half time in the dressing room. Can you imagine that? You can't smoke now anyway, apart from in your own home. Mind you, we did, bless him, die of lung cancer eventually, which was, was an awful business. And but quite frankly, Milburn is the schoolboy hero that become the adult hero. Top man. I had to get him in the side.
Yeah, and look, the two goal scorers you've got alongside him, equally as talented, knew where the goal was, and it would be really interesting to see if these three could actually have played together. I suspect if you'd asked Jackie to play out on the flank to get him into this side alongside the other two, he would have been probably the more understanding, more accepting of the instruction. I'm not too sure these two gentlemen would have taken you up on the offer, and I'm really intrigued to see who you've got playing in the centre more than anything. So we'll start there. Who is your out-and-out centre forward?
Alan Shearer. He's
So
one of the greatest.
The question is there. Then let's reveal the other man on
Yeah.
who will be playing out on the right, and it's Malcolm Macdonald, a good pal of yours.
Out on the left. Milburn will be outside right.
So
Shearer centre forward and Malcolm Macdonald's the other position. They have the three.
How would Malcolm then accept that, do you think?
Well, first and foremost, Alan Shearer, just very quickly, has to be a number. He is the greatest English bulldog centre forward of all time, bar none. That's the first thing we've got to say. That is the first thing we've got to say. He was a top goal scorer from the age of 17. He's got the Newcastle United record, and he beat Jackie to get that record. So how would you leave Milburn and Shearer, the greatest goal scorers in 130 years of Newcastle United history, out of a Newcastle United Hall of Fame side? That's for starters. And so Shearer is the number one centre forward of the lot. By the way, I haven't got one of the greatest centre forwards ever in that side because I couldn't put any more in. That's Hughie Gallacher, who is in the Hall of Fame. But I didn't say Hughie played in the 20s, and in any case, I wanted to go with these three. Shearer is the best, the most prolific goal scorer. 206 goals. Loved Jackie Milburn. He invited Laura, the Jackie's widow, to his testimonial match after he scored the 206 goals. 52,000 for his testimonial match. For a start, you look at Milburn, you look at Shearer as two of my front three. They're the only two players that have got a statue at Newcastle, Newcastle United at St. James's Park. The third statue is Bobby Robson. The only two players that have got statues are Milburn and Shearer. Now, the simple thing is, you say, how would Malcolm Macdonald, who is the third number 9 legend in that side and is becoming the other two are Geordies, Milburn and Shearer, and Macdonald's an adopted Geordie who's still living on Tyneside now. We were talking about players that come back and live here. The interesting thing, Alan Shearer always said that and really I'm picking these players in that pump, all of them obviously, but he always said is he got a little bit over the pump. By the time he was going to break the goal scoring record, he had lost half a yard of pace. Everybody does. Every footballer does as he gets older. Every footballer does. And he said he couldn't quite get beyond the defences in the same way. He could hold the ball up. He still had his shooting ability. He still had his know-how. He was still a great header of the ball, but he needed blistering pace alongside him. He says, now, always benefited from blistering pace because it was the one thing he didn't have, even in his pump. He didn't have blistering pace. Malcolm Macdonald has blistering pace. So for a start, he could play left side of Shearer. They both want to score goals, but isn't that wonderful? And Milburn wants to score goals, but Milburn was an outside right initially. So, it's quite easy to get him to play outside right. With Macdonald, I've often said to Macdonald, Macdonald knew the other two, knows the other two. Milburn looked after McDonald when he first came up here, etc., etc. And he's often asked by fans and other people, and including me, could you have played with Alan Shearer, or would it have to be one or two? He said, I could play with Alan Shearer, no doubt whatsoever. He says, because we would play in tandem. We would cover each other's strengths and weaknesses. And if there's one thing, Alan hasn't got pace, so let his two outriders have pace. Milburn had pace and McDonald had pace. And McDonald is a clever footballer. When he's the number one man at Newcastle and the only goal scorer, he shoved everybody out of place. But when he played centre forward for Newcastle, John Tudor was scoring a barrel load of goals by his side, you know. John Tudor scored a pile of goals by the side of McDonald because in those days you played two strikers up top. I mean, a few clubs still do it now, but not many. Now they often play one striker through the middle and two wingmen. Now, I could go for the modern three, which I would do with Milburn outside right and McDonald a bit closer to Shearer than that. But you could go with two out-and-out strikers in McDonald and Shearer, the same as you went with Shearer. And by the way, when Shearer was saying I need pace, he said I off benefit by having Craig Bellamy because he produced the pace that I didn't have. And so we could stretch. And because people were terrified of Bellamy's pace and trying to cover Bellamy, they left space for Shearer. Because of McDonald's pace, they'd be terrified to death of McDonald, which would leave space that would be utilised by a very clever centre forward like Shearer. So, they would complement each other because they're not both blistering pace. Shearer, who was not great pace, would have Milburn and McDonald on either side of him, who have got huge pace. And by the way, if McDonald says, who's Mr. Ego himself, and that is meant as a compliment because all great players have an ego, else you're not a great player, with the possible exception of Jock, who didn't know how to spell ego. But McDonald says he can play with Shearer. Now, if McDonald says that, that's good enough for me.
Yeah, I mean, the question I was going to ask way back in the middle of the show was about your lack of width, but actually I've just gone back down the list there, and there's not many wingers in the Hall of Fame. The only one that really stands out is Bobby Mitchell.
That was the only guy I was worried about not including Mitchell, but I could have picked the second side. And I could have picked the second side, and I could have had Nobby on the right wing and Mitchell on the left wing, and that.
Yeah, I think they would have been your two options: Nobby on the right, Mitchell on the left. Keegan's not in it either. John, was that a difficult decision?
It was and it wasn't. Without a shadow of doubt. I mean, I could have played McDermott in midfield. And if you take the old guys, and I never saw them play, but on reputation, Lawrence is the goalkeeper is the greatest appearances made for the club. Gallagher was the last man to captain and top score when Newcastle won the championship, which was 27. And Colin Veitch can play anywhere, and we've talked about him on previous podcasts. They could easily get in the side. I didn't see them, so I tended to go for people that I did see. Keegan, if we were asking for the 10 greatest influences at Newcastle United, Kevin Keegan would well be in that. But as a player, he only played 2 seasons for us. They were both in the second division, not in the top flight. And it was near the end of his career when his pace had gone and he wasn't quite the player. That's why the minute we won promotion, he retired. Because he was honest enough to himself to say, I won't be able to play in the first division now. Not to the standard I used to, and he was so proud he would have had to play to that standard, and he decided not to. So built purely on what their form was for Newcastle, 2 seasons in the second division wouldn't take out Milburn, Shearer or McDonald for me with Keegan. But if you were saying who's the top 10 influences at Newcastle, I tell you, would probably be in the top 5, and none of them are in my team. And that would be Joe Harvey and Kevin Keegan and Stan Seymour. if you were taking the top influences that influenced the club, because as managers, as chairman in Seymour's case, manager with Keegan, and the way he influenced the team as a player to drag them out by their coattails and up into the top flight, they would be in my influences side, but they wouldn't be in my actual team.
Nope, totally get that. Joe Harvey is your pick for manager.
He
Again,
is.
the options, as you've mentioned there, the Keegan, Seymour, and Bobby Robson as well with the options. But I suppose, John, you can't really look past the last manager to lift a major trophy for Newcastle United.
No, I mean, the three, I mean, it's almost embarrassing having to do, because we've had an embarrassing riches when you say Harvey, Robson, Seymour, and Keegan. The only trouble is, outside of those four, we've had a lot of rubbish at times. We've had some very terrible managers. We've had four absolutely outstanding. And I found it embarrassing, and not embarrassing, tough, and being a little bit embarrassed not to get Keegan in somewhere because of what he's done for Newcastle, not to get Stan Seymour in somewhere. And it was easy with Bobby because I couldn't put him in the team. He never played for us, but not to get him in as manager. But I can't go for anybody else but Joe. And if you think what he did, because he was manager on the field to start with when he was skipper, in 51 and 52 in the 48 promotion side, he was manager on the field, and then he was manager. And in his time as manager, we won trophies for fun. Now I know they weren't all the super duper trophies, but the European Fairs Cup, the only European trophy we've had, is ginormous. Second division champions to bring them up, not going up like when Kevin played and we went up from third position. He took them up as champions. He built three sides: the 65 second division champions, the 69 European Fairs Cup winning side, and the 74 FA Cup final side. He built three sides. He was one of the greatest man managers I've ever known. He was superb. The only fella to match him in buying players and having an eye for players was Kevin Keegan. And at Newcastle, apart from winning the European Fairs Cup, he won the Anglo-Italian, which is very difficult to do on Italian soil. And we beat Roma on Italian soil, and we beat Fiorentina on Italian soil. And then he won two Anglo-Scottish. I mean, and got to the FA Cup final. In 11 years, we were always in the hunt for trophies, and there wasn't a single relegation in that run. And on that alone, because however great Keegan is and Bobby Robson is, and I will be forever as a Geordie grateful to both of them. If you take the bottom line, they won now, Joe did. Joe won something. So I've got to go with Joe.
Yep, 100% there. And all that remains to be done, John. Now you've picked your team. I'll quickly run through it. Shay Given, David Craig, Frank Brennan, Bob Moncur, Frank Clark, Rob Lee, Peter Beardsley, Gary Speed, Jackie Milburn, Alan Shearer, and Malcolm McDonald. The final question I'm going to pose to you, John, is there someone not included in the Hall of Fame that you would like to give a place to as the one and only substitute? So just while you're deciding, we put a graphic out about a year ago, and the options we put out as the next person to enter the Hall of Fame were John Anderson, Fabrizio Colaccini, Chris Waddle, Terry Hibbett, Glenn Roeder, Gaza, Len White, and Johnny Gutierrez. Now, Len White, fantastic. Actually, 30 years this week since his passing. Brilliant player. Often overshadowed because he played alongside Jackie Milburn, but his score scoring record is something very, very special. You've mentioned Gaza. You've mentioned Waddle. Ando, fantastic servant to the club. Glenn Roeder, thoroughly underrated. Fantastic centre-back. Great captain. Colaccini up there as well. But for me, John, it has to be Terry Hibbett. If it was my decision, it would be Terry Hibbett, because I don't think we've seen a winger come close to what he could have done. And I'm basing that on what you've told me, on the videos that I've seen, on what I've been told by family members, what I've been told by ex-players like Malcolm, like Frank Clark. No one's come close to Terry Hibbett. So he would be my pick. But what about you?
Well, I'll give you one pick, and it might be controversial, but that's a bit of fun that's in it. And then I want to mention two or three other players that I think ought to now be considered by Newcastle United for the Hall of Fame. The one I'm going to give you is Willie McFall, because he
Okay.
spent 20 odd years at Newcastle United. He was the goalkeeper when we won our only European trophy. He played for Newcastle United all those years and immediately went on the coaching staff, was reserve team coach, then assistant coach, then assistant manager, and eventually manager until he finished. He did about 20 to 25 years loyal service to this football club, and he stands alongside people like Kevin Keegan and Joe Harvey and Stan Seymour, who both managed this club and played for them, and played for them to a high level. And I think on that alone, I'm not saying he's the best player that hasn't gone into the Hall of Fame yet, but if you look at the service he gave this club, it ought to be recognised. First team service as a goalkeeper, and then every coaching position possible and the manager, and all simultaneously, by the way. He never ever left the club from the day he come from Lingfield till the day he left as a manager. And that deserves recognition. Other players that aren't in, you mentioned a few, and you mentioned a couple of these, but aren't in the Hall of Fame, and I would like it to be rectified pretty quickly, is Terry Hibbert, who you mentioned, who more than deserves a place. Big Win Davies is our great centre forward from the 1969 First Cup winning side, ought to be in the Hall of Fame. Len White, the greatest centre forward never to be capped by England, and Jimmy Schooler, the 1955 FA Cup winning captain at Wembley, who ran the show against Manchester City. I think Big Win should be in, Hibby should be in, White should be in, Schooler should be in, McFall should be in, and I would pick Waddle and Gascoigne at some stage as well. Waddle, unquestionably, Gascoigne only had a limited time here, but it was huge. It started off with him winning the FA Youth Cup, scoring two in the final from midfield against Elton John's Watford, to everything he did that made him the Gaza he was at Newcastle United. I think, you think, do we ever exhaust players to go in the Hall of Fame? But if you only pick two every year, and you've got Gaza, Waddle, McFall, White, Schooler, Wyn Davies, and Hibby, there's seven players there that I think deserve to be in. And there's so many more hopefully going to come with the run that we're on at the moment that are going to end up in the Hall of Fame. But yes, I would love Hibby. I would love McFall. But I would love all seven that I mentioned. There's plenty of room. And the gentlemen that make the decision, put them seven on the list. Consider them. And then when you don't pick any of them, come to me and tell me why. Because as a fan, I wouldn't understand why.
Well, there we go. It's certainly going to be interesting to see who the next two into the Hall of Fame will be, and that'll happen sometime next year. If things have gone like previous years, they'd have the foundation dinner, and then the two inductees go up on stage and are welcomed into the Hall of Fame. Well, we hope you guys have enjoyed this slightly different Monday show. Do head over to chroniclelive.co.uk for all the latest Newcastle United news, including our daily transfer live blog. And while I may be on holiday, there's still a boatload of content podcasts coming your way. I've got a few in the bag. Me and John will be back it'll be Thursday coming this week, where we talk about Lewis Hall and what the future holds for him and Newcastle's left back position. So do look out for that one. There'll be another episode with Lee Ryder as he picks his dream transfer window for this summer. And if you haven't already, look back down your podcast channel and take a listen to the Introducing Lloyd Kelly episode, where I caught up with a Bournemouth fan who is a little bit sad Lloyd Kelly's left, but also very excited to see what he can do at Newcastle United. They are huge fans of Lloyd Kelly, and by all accounts, if Lloyd Kelly can overcome that injury, Newcastle United have signed a player destined, as the Bournemouth fan said, for England in the next 12 months. Quite the claim, quite the prediction, but go back, listen to it, watch it, let us know what you think. And from myself and John, we'll see you guys very soon.